Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Kaitlin O'Shea with us from Preservation in Pink. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, let's see. I grew up on Long Island, New York. I have a undergraduate degree, a Bachelor's of Arts in Preservation from the University of Mary Washington, formerly Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I have a master's degree in preservation from the University of Vermont. I guess I categorize my professional career so far in 3 segments. I worked for the U.S. Army as a civilian contractor for 3 years, and I have worked for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. I did that for about 5 years, and now I've worked for a consulting firm, BHB, for 5 years as well.
Okay. And what kind of consulting work do you do? Oops.
I'm sorry, I muted.
Oh.
Something was muted.
Oh no. Did you what type of consulting work do you do now?
I am a preservation planner, so I primarily do regulatory work, Section 106, Section 4F, and then state permitting as well.
Reviewing and providing like specifications, would that be?
Yes, I do a lot of infrastructure work, so because I work with a lot of engineers. So for example, a sidewalk project that is going through a historic village or historic district. I identify the historic properties based on the project's APE, area of potential effect, and then assess if properties are historic and if the project will affect any of those properties. And if there are adverse effects, how do we resolve those effects? And that's all to comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act.
And that gets triggered, just for people who aren't aware. And I've never actually dealt with a project that had to deal with it, but it gets triggered when there's federal money involved, and then there's you're doing something that's maybe not directly related to the historic property. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's anytime a project has federal funding or requires a federal permit, Section 106 is triggered.
Okay. So funding or permit. Yeah, there was a project near my house that was triggered because they had to do something with the interstate. So actually that saves the historic properties there.
Yes,
otherwise it might not have. but
that's the beauty of it. Yes.
Yes. So, and I know you also have your newsletter and your blog, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I guess that's extra, again, beyond what you do at work. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I have 2 little girls right now, 2 little kids. So my blogging days are not at their peak right now.
Yeah, I think things like that wax and wane because you have other priorities and you need to take care of those now. So tell me a little bit about why you chose preservation, what interests you, or what drew you in.
Sure. I had never actually heard of the term preservation. I'll start with that until I was looking at colleges But I always loved history. I loved writing. I loved knowing what things used to be. I grew up in the same house that my mom grew up in, so she could always answer those questions for me when we were on our family Sunday drives
Yeah.
around Long Island. Um, and at the same time, I always wanted to live in a, I guess a small town where you could walk places. I grew up in what I call the ultimate suburbia, and I had a wonderful childhood, so there's nothing against that, but I just wanted to live somewhere where I could walk places.
Because the suburbs were not built to be walkable. They were built
Right.
for everybody to have a car and drive.
And we did. We could walk
Yeah.
to elementary school, and that was it.
Yeah.
We drove to the beach, we drove to the stores, we drove, anywhere we had to go. And then my grandmother lived in this little town called Point Lookout, New York. And it was like 10 blocks by 3 blocks, and you could walk to the grocery store, you could walk to the library, we did everything on foot or by bike, and to me that was ideal. So you have I had that desire to find a kind of a walkable community with a community feel, and I loved reading, history and writing. And then one day I'm sitting there with my mom, I was 17 or so, looking through her civil service test book that she had, and the phrase historic preservation was on that page. And it sounds ridiculous, but a light bulb went off in my head. I saw that phrase and I said to myself, that's what I want to do. I don't know what that is,
Yes.
but that's it. And then I found the 7 undergraduate programs in the country at the time and looked at them and ended up at Mary Washington, which I loved. It was just this wonderful umbrella of preservation, and it just it sucked me in. Preservation really drew me in.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that's great. And I think I I look at, when you're that age, you feel like you're grown up. You really do. Like, you feel like you
Yeah.
know everything. But I look at the kids that I know that are that age, or maybe a little bit older, a little bit younger. I think it's really not fair to make people decide what they want to do at this age.
Yeah,
They don't have it
crazy.
figured out. I decided to go to culinary school right out of high school. I had been accepted to college, and I was March of my senior year, I was laying on the sofa at home sick, and I saw a picture or a commercial for a pastry chef program. I'm like, that's what I'm gonna do. So
Oh wow.
my
So did
parents,
you do that?
my parents freaked out a little bit, and I did that for a few years. It was fun, but then I'm like, I don't want to do this forever. So
That's a tough field to be in.
yeah, it is. So I get the light bulb, but I'm glad that it worked for you, and you found something you were passionate about. And I think that you can definitely see from your writings and from your postings that you are very passionate about preservation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I wrote it in my notes. One of the things that I loved on your website was that you say that you like to connect everyday life to historic preservation, because I think a lot of people think it's like something that's like way above, like it's museums, it's things that people don't do, but it can be everyday life, and I think that that's something that people don't think about, because if your goal is just to retain historic fabric, you can do that without making your house a museum. So I really think that you can make it accessible, and I think that's really important. I think that that's changing, but even when I started, I've worked full time in almost 20 years in preservation, and even when I started, it was mostly older people, much older than me, and it was going for museum quality, and I've seen that shift of going more towards maintenance, and I don't know if you've seen that too. In your work and in your experience.
Yes, that's a perfect point. I felt when so I graduated college in 2006, and at the time, even the National Trust conferences at the time didn't feel very friendly to students and young professionals, and it was more I guess it felt scarier, more regulatory related, or just following the standards, the Secretary of Interior standards, and museum quality. And so that's, how long is that now? 14 years later. Especially in the past 5 years, I'd say I've really seen a change with popularity of Instagram increasing and other social platforms where people are just kind of connecting to preservation in different ways and appreciating their historic neighborhoods or their small downtowns or their large, vibrant cities, whatever it may be. And that, I think that's helping people see that preservation is not this scary field telling you what to do. It's really valuing what you have.
I agree. And there's and it's probably almost 10 years old now. There was a young woman that worked for the trust, the National Trust, and she did a TED Talk, and it was about how, like, you might not even realize you're a preservationist, but you are. And I that really spoke to me then. And I think that if more people looked at that, they might not even realize that they're into historic preservation, but they are, because they do these things.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about preservation in pink. Was that kind of what made you start to document your journey through preservation?
Preservation in pink, well, it's a long story, so
Okay.
I'll spare you the fully detailed story. But as I said, I went to Mary Washington. I loved the program, and my classmates, my good friends, and I, we would find ourselves studying late at night and having coffee conversations about preservation and how we could save the world with preservation in that young, wonderfully optimistic undergraduate spirit. And when I graduated, when we graduated, we were scattered. Some of us were in Europe. I was in North Carolina. We had friends in Virginia. We were just all over. We could no longer meet in one place and have those conversations that we loved and that really drove our passion. And at the same time, I started a job as an oral history project manager at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And I loved oral history, but it was the only thing I did at my job, and I really missed the other aspects of preservation. Right. So I needed something, and I was 21 when I graduated college. I didn't have any kids. You have a lot of free time when you're 21. So I needed something to do. So I thought, I'll start a newsletter about preservation and just email it to everybody I know. So I did, and the first newsletter, it was in 2007. That was purely just me. I might have had one friend write one small article for me, but I just wanted to show everybody, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you want to participate? This is what I miss talking about. Do you want to join me? And then the next newsletter, I had a few more people write for me. And I say for me, it was really as a favor. I never made any money off of it. I tried to. I didn't pay anybody. We were all just young and had free time.
Right. And sharing ideas.
Yeah, and it was so wonderful to read what people were writing. And then the newsletter was a lot of work, which I liked, but it was such a long time between publications, I say in quotes, that I thought, oh, well, blogging is kind of new. Let me start a blog so I can at least connect with people in smaller doses, and I don't have to do it only twice a year. And I guess the blog started about the same time, 2007, as a placeholder for the newsletter as well. And it just kind of continued from there. I loved documenting what I saw. I was inspired by my travels and my work and news articles and just companies that had preservation-minded missions or people working for them. And that, it just it kept going and going, because I always had something to say, and while I still do now always have something to say, it's not necessarily there.
I find that too when I'm doing our content creation for our marketing, is I'll find an article or something and I'm like, well, I want to talk about that, so I can just write about this story and then tell you why I think you should do it this way.
Yes. It's a good public platform.
It is. So I get that. And I think that I actually just saw, I have a good friend who's a writer, she writes fiction novels, and she posted on social media a couple weeks ago, I just read 2 books for fun, and I didn't even think about where I was going to post it or write about it. And I think there's that trap, you see interesting things and you don't necessarily have to share it with everybody.
Right. Yeah, that is. That would probably be tied to that Netflix documentary right now, The Social Dilemma, a little bit.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I haven't seen that, but you're the second person that's mentioned that to me. So
It's
I'll have to,
fascinating.
yeah, I'll have to watch it. So your purpose was just kind of to to continue the conversation with your classmates. Did you get a wider distribution then? Or I guess when you started blogging, you did?
I did. Well,
Yeah.
I emailed the newsletters to everybody I knew, so whoever read my emails. And slowly, I guess more people found it. At the time, I don't think there were other preservation blogs.
Right.
So there was really nowhere to go find this friendly, sometimes silly preservation information on the internet. It was more official.
Right.
And I remember in the early days when I was writing blog posts, I'd do it with the uh, attempt to connect to my younger sisters, who the youngest one is 6 years younger than me, but she, she was not a preservationist. She studied exercise science, but if she could relate to what I wrote
Right.
and say, "Oh, I see what you mean," then I considered that a success. So that was how I approached it in the beginning. And then as more and more preservationists, I guess, found it, or just people interested in preservation found it, it really, I made wonderful friends because of it. I met a lot of people at conferences who said, "Oh, I read your blog, I love it," or "I found this really interesting," and it just warmed my heart that
Yeah.
people enjoyed what I was writing, and that we could connect based on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is very very gratifying that people appreciate the effort that you put in and that the information that you're sharing. I find that also. Did you focus on certain topics, or did you just kind of do preservation as a wide umbrella?
Definitely as an umbrella.
Okay.
I always thought that more people could connect to preservation if they knew that it related to architectural history and museums and planning, and even home restoration and economic factors, and
Right.
it goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And making and maybe things that people are interested in that they maybe didn't even realize were preservation. So then you're introducing it as another thing, but it's already something that they were interested in.
Yes, letting them know, hey, you like this idea, or you agree? Well, this is part of preservation, so
Right.
we have this common ground.
Yeah. So and I know you said you've taken a step back. I know you're still pretty active on Instagram, though. Is that you're just not blogging as much? Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I love blogging. I just, it sounds cliche, I don't have the time right now to do it like I used to. I have
No,
two little kids. I work. It's life in 2020 is crazy.
yeah. Well, and the little ones will only be this age once, so I think that's
Yeah,
important to spend time with them rather than my mom was always yelling at me while she was typing up her blog.
I know.
That sounds like a
I
story I would
know.
tell.
Yeah, I probably do that enough with my regular work. I don't need to add in
Yeah.
side work.
So what trends or challenges do you see in preservation, either from your work or from your life in preservation?
I think one, well, the same challenge that's been around is still there. The fact for preservation, the fact that people believe these myths about the National Register or about historic preservation, and that's just, that the National Register will tell you what to do with your house, when really it's not
Right.
true. The National Register is actually protecting your house from federal action. But that's just a matter of constant education, I think.
Yeah.
I
I think
think one new challenge, I guess, that we touched upon briefly is I call it the purist versus the practical. How many ideas from the 1960s and 70s of preservation can we still apply in 2020? Um, and that's not to say they were all bad, but that's certainly not to say they were all good either.
right.
Um, and that goes too with restoration. People are, if they're caring for their homes, but slightly changing their property, where's the line between good preservation and not good preservation. I don't have the answers for all of these.
Well, and I don't think there's a one size fits all answer either. I think it depends on the
True.
property and the owner. But I know that that's we see projects probably that were done 40 or 50 years ago that were early restorations, and that some of the solutions are very different than what we would recommend now. And it's not that they did them wrong, it's just that they didn't have all of the maybe they didn't have all the research and everything else that we have now. So like, I think there's that balance too, that we just have to sometimes admit that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah, that is a good trait to have.
Yeah. So, but and you know, sometimes we see solutions on projects that like, oh, if we had known that, you know, several years ago, that would have been another solution that we could have applied here rather than, you know, the way that we did it. Not that it was wrong. That's why I don't like, and this is just me personally, I don't like going in and somebody, you know, just taking me through the house and like, this contractor did this, what do you think? I don't like to stand there and criticize because I don't know what reasoning there, unless it's something that's really egregious. I don't know what their reasoning was for why they did it that way, because there's multiple ways to do things. Not that,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. So I agree. I think there are some people though that are purists, but I think at least in the private sector, there's less people that want to live in a museum. So then we're doing those compromises pretty regularly.
Yeah. It is. I think it's a good trend of change and kind of. I don't know that loosening up is the correct term, but I'd say being more inclusive of
Right.
property types and people.
Yeah. And if you can help people to understand why they shouldn't rip out all their windows, or they shouldn't, you know, change all the trim just because they, you know, they want to do something different, like that, those are things that will help the building in the long run. Whereas if you know, but if you want to make, you know, the house more livable for you and you want to redo the kitchen, I mean, then I you know, I think there's those balances. Like, you know, there's some rooms in the house that always get updated, but you can keep the historic fabric. And I think that that's where you kind of need to have that balance. And I think it is hard from a preservation standpoint, because I think you are going against the marketing of, you just need new materials, you just need new of whatever. So yeah, I think that making it more accessible does help that, and it's green. I think that that's the other thing that we need to like have that intersection of sustainability and preservation also.
Yeah.
And help people realize that.
Related to materials, and probably what you do with practical preservation and fabric. So my husband and I purchased a fixer-upper. We live in Burlington, Vermont. We just moved in December, and
right before everything was crazy.
Yes. Right before the second baby came, right before the world shut down. And our house is full of lead.
Oh, yeah.
And the windows are cased in lead, and it's scary, the effects of lead to little children. Yeah. So before being a parent in a historic house with windows that were covered in lead and really in crummy condition, I would have never said take out your windows and replace them. But we are, because the dust is too damaging and can't be undone.
It can, and to you would have to pay somebody to take them out and strip them off site, because I wouldn't want to strip them with little ones in the house. So I completely, from a safety standpoint, I think, and that's something else that we talk about. And actually I was at a project this morning looking at a house that they had just bought last week, and there was no handrail from the first floor to the second floor, and it didn't look like there ever had been one. It was like there was there was a wall half of the way, but the rest of the way I couldn't see any evidence in the tread where there had ever been a stairwell. And I said, if an inspector comes in, they're going to talk to you about putting a railing in here. I said, because this is dangerous.
but for anybody.
But safety definitely needs to come first. And I think that that's something that a purist might, you know, pull their hair out. But I mean, there are some things that I think that you can, if it's been shown to be safe, you know, then you could make that argument that it is safe. But I think, yeah, especially with small children and lead, it is damaging. I agree.
Yeah. We are putting back wood windows, wood 2/2s.
Yes.
Granted, they won't last 120 years like
Right.
these
Yeah.
are old windows, but we'll be able to open them dust free, which will be
Yes.
wonderful.
Yes. Well,
and they'll
yeah.
still match.
Yeah. I was we have the windows that our house was built with, which is almost 100 years old, and I was someplace and I was helping clean, and they had new windows, and they tipped in to clean, and I'm like, this is so nice. And then I said to myself, Danielle, it doesn't matter because you don't clean your windows anyway. I clean the front window where the dogs hang out and where there's all the dog nose prints, but other than that, the rest of the windows are
right. It's tantalizing, perhaps convenience, and then you don't need it anyway. Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter.
I'm with you.
So, is there anything that you thought about while we were talking that you want to share, or that you maybe that crossed your mind?
One, I don't know if it's a challenge, but it's a topic that comes up from time to time, is the idea of a certification kind of for preservation, and like engineers have or architects have. I wish as a field we could address that, and I would love to see one, and really not to diminish those who are preservationists but not academically trained, but really in the professional realm for those of us who do have the degrees and are working with contractors or engineers or you know whoever it might be, to say this is a real field, we studied for this. There is some science involved depending on which track you take. But
do you feel and I've seen that discussion, do you feel like that would give you like a little bit more credibility with like dealing with the designers and those people? Is that why you think that it would be a good idea, or is it just more of a recognition?
I think no, it would definitely give more credibility, especially working in the regulatory field. I think it would also kind of maybe not level out the playing field, but make sure everyone is getting the same sort of basic preservation theory from different programs, and so we all have that foundation. That would be nice.
No, and I think as an academic program, I mean, I know there's some that have been around a while, but there's more and more programs coming up that I've noticed, and I think that probably is a good idea, and that's probably where it's headed. I know I've heard of I've seen the discussion of like, well, then what about like the crafts people and stuff, and I think that's a little bit different. I know that there are certification programs like through like the remodeling magazine has like you can be a certified kitchen designer, you can be all these different things, but I think that's more theory, and for doing academic work and doing that makes sense, but I don't know if having a certificate program for like tradespeople is necessarily the right answer. But then I get upset that we have a really good trade school here in Lancaster. It was started by Thaddeus Stevens. It's Thaddeus Stevens College of, I think it's College of something now. But they had a preservation program that they had done with the State Office of Historic Preservation, and it was bothering me because it was only like an 8-week program. I'm like, there's no way you can teach somebody how to be a tradesperson in 8 weeks. Like your intentions are good, but you're just gonna send people out and they're gonna be scary. Like, I think it needs to be like maybe an apprentice type program that's like has structure over multiple years, something like that. Like I don't think you can turn people out in a certificate program.
Yeah, that's pretty quick. But I agree with you. The trades would be very different. I guess more certificate for, dare I say, the paperwork part of it.
Well,
those of us who are more invested.
But I can see why that would be important, and maybe, and also I think continuing education is important. I think continuing education is important for everybody.
Yeah.
because there's so many things that if you just stay in your own little bubble, you don't see all the other stuff that's going on that maybe could even help the work that you're doing. So I think continuing education is very important for everyone.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So how can someone contact you, or how should they follow you? How, like, where can they find you?
If somebody just wants to chat with me, email is the easiest probably. My email is KaitlinO'Shea@gmail.com. I can spell that KaitlinO'Shea@gmail.com.
Okay.
On social.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about your social.
Oh, sure. My blog website is www.preservationinpink.com. That'll take you right to it. And my Instagram is at presinpink, PRESINPINK. I do have Twitter, but since the 2016 election, I've not used it. So.
Okay, that's fine. We don't have to. And then we'll make sure that those are all on our site where we host it, so that people can, if they hear this and want to find you, they can go there too if they didn't catch it while you were talking. Well, thank you very much for coming on with me today. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Me too. I'm flattered, and it was lovely to meet you, even via Zoom.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.